So yeah, just first of all, I'd like to introduce from N-TUTOR, who very kindly supported this event. I'd like to invite up Sharon Flynn to say a few words. Thanks. Round of applause. Yeah.
Hi everybody, and thank you very much for the introduction, Brian, and thank you to Brian and Jennifer for inviting me to come along and just say a few words before we get started. This is a really exciting event, really great to see it happening, and it's just wonderful to see so many people signed up and so many people in the room. My name is Sharon Flynn, and I'm the National Coordinator of the N-TUTOR programme. And I know that there are some people in the room who will know a lot about N-TUTOR and others who know nothing at all. So bear with me while I just give you an overview as much as I can. So the N-TUTOR programme, it's a very ambitious programme of work which is aimed to transform learning. You can see the pull-up banner there, transform learning in the technological higher education sector. It's been funded under the Next Generation EU scheme, hence the Next Generation EU hashtag, and through the National Resilience and Recovery Programme, the Irish Government has invested €40 million over 2 years in the emerging sector. And N-TUTOR is a collaboration of 7 higher education institution partners, and they are ATU, Dundalk IT, IADT in Dún Laoghaire, MTU, SETU, TU Dublin, and TUTH. I had to write them all down for fear I'd leave one out, and that would be majorly embarrassing. I know that all of those institutions are well represented here today, so if you haven't said hello to me yet, do say hello to me during the break. Would love to meet you. N-TUTOR is supported by a Programme Management Office, which is where I am based, which is run out of Thea, and is also very closely monitored and supported, I have to say, by the HEA. I won't go into all of the work packages, but I will just let you know that the programme of work has got 4 streams, 12 work packages and multiple deliverables, and I mentioned at the beginning it was hugely ambitious. The 4 streams, just to name them out, are student empowerment. Stream 2 is around staff capabilities and curriculum development. Stream 3 is the digital ecosystem to support streams 1 and 2. And Stream 4, which was only added at the beginning of this year, is around securing progress, demonstrating impact and sustaining impact into the future. More importantly, there are 6 core themes, and these themes run throughout all of the streams. The 6 themes are digital transformation, equality, diversity and inclusion, universal design for learning, academic integrity, employability, and most importantly for today, education for sustainability. Just to give you a couple of examples of where that theme comes into the streams, under Stream 2, for example, we have agreed a curriculum design framework which includes explicit reference and guidelines for sustainability in higher education. There are also regular masterclasses, online masterclasses. They happen once a month, and there have been a number of those which have been dedicated to the area of sustainability in education, and the purpose of those is to raise awareness and share expertise. Those masterclasses, by the way, have been recorded so far, so if you missed any before, you can certainly catch up again. The website is on that banner there, transforminglearning.ie. In Stream 1, which is around student empowerment, we have a large number of student champions who've been employed right across the sector. And many of them are working in the area of sustainability, involved in local on-campus initiatives. We also have the students as partners in Innovation and Change Fellowship Scheme, which are staff-student projects. We launched about 130 projects in May of last year, and we had a lovely event in Croke Park in April where we celebrated all of the fabulous projects, and 40 of those were in the area of sustainability. And we're actually just about launching another run of some of those projects, so that's been a hugely successful piece of work. Also in Stream 1, there is a digital backpack, which is a common platform for all of our students across the 7 HEIs, which is an opportunity for them to access a collection of online courses for which they can earn digital badges, which they can then take and display, for example, in their LinkedIn profile or in many other ways. And one of the badges specifically is on an introduction to the Sustainable Development Goals. In stream 3, we put out a call for funding for collaborative projects across the sector. And that's really why we're here today, because N-TUTOR is delighted to support the CALT proposal, Climate Action Leadership Training, led by TU Dublin and ATU. We are very grateful to Brian and also to Mark Kelly. I think Mark is here somewhere. Yeah, waving there up the back, brilliant. Who've been leading out on this. It's a really, truly collaborative piece of work, and I think it very effectively demonstrates by working together we can achieve so much more than when we go it alone. And I'm going to sit down now again, I promise. Stream 4, the demonstrating and sustaining impact piece. I just would like to let you know that we've just issued a save the date for a final N-TUTOR showcase event, which is going to take place on Tuesday, the 26th of November in the Convention Centre in Dublin. We'd love to see as many of you there as possible. It's going to be a real celebration of the whole of our N-TUTOR activities and achievements. For more information, please do visit the website, which is very handily on the bottom of this banner, transforminglearning.ie. I will just say at the moment it's an interim site, and we'll be launching a new site at the same URL, hopefully early next month. So that's me.
Thanks, Sharon. And now to formally welcome you to TU Dublin and to talk about climate action leadership in the university sector. Please welcome Jennifer Boyer, our Vice President for Sustainability.
Thanks, and good morning, or good afternoon, everyone, as it now is. Can you hear me okay if I put the mic down? Perfect. Okay, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Sharon, so much for your leadership in making today's summit possible. I remember sitting down with Sharon in the early days when she was first appointed as the National N-TUTOR lead. The N-TUTOR funding comes through the National Recovery and Resilience Fund in the EU. And we were discussing, well, what are the key areas as a technological university sector that we can come together on that will benefit us all and that will have the lasting impact of how the TUs can focus on the future together. And I suppose very quickly we came to a convening with all of the partners that sustainability competencies built up across our organizations is absolutely fundamental to setting us into the future and allowing us to demonstrate that technological capability that we aspire to. So I suppose it's because of that that we're here, and also I know we've been having conversations across the sector more broadly about the training needs for climate action across the public sector. How would we do this together? And the opportunity to understand and learn how best to engage leaders across organizations in a way that will be meaningful, that will impact the work that they do every day is no small feat, because everybody has different needs. And so we've been in the process for the last 3 or 4 months in rolling out a pilot at TU Dublin where we've worked in collaboration with N-TUTOR to develop what training needs we believe we need and to roll those out, learn from those, and now we're in the process of scaling those across the N-TUTOR partners more widely, and welcome all of your feedback on that process. We look forward to collaborating with more people on this process because ultimately we know that these training needs are not going anywhere. They will need to continue to scale and roll out across all of the staff across our organizations. Building student voice and capacity along the way is absolutely critical. So what is really important as part of this journey is bringing the students into the fold and making sure that it's relevant from their perspective. We have the University Sustainability Council, of which Brian and our SU presidents are members, along with the Green Campus Committee members. But actually having a separate event in the fall is something that N-TUTOR will be sponsoring, which will be the Student Climate Summit. And so watch this space into the future. It'll probably appear on that URL and other social media as well. So in terms of the journey to date, TU Dublin has now trained more than 100 senior leaders across the organization. We are scaling that learning, of which there's lots to be improved across the N-TUTORR partnership between now and the end of December, and hope to capture all of the senior leaders by the end of this year. Simultaneously, we're working internally to scale the training that we've developed to all of the next layer of our organization, which is more than 250 people. So we hope that by the end of this year, TU Dublin will have reached an approximate figure of between 300 and 400 people formally trained as climate action leaders. I think what's really important to all of this process is understanding that the USP, or the uniqueness of what we do in our universities through sustainability and climate is no longer the selling point. That's not the thing that's going to attract students. Students expect to see this. People coming to work in our organizations expect us to behave sustainably and be responsible citizens. So going back to Sharon's point, this is the moment in time where we have to come together and we have to work together more closely than before. The opportunity to do that through the N-TUTORR project has been transformative at a number of levels, and it allows for those values and attitudes that are necessary to lead on this agenda to become fully formed through a collegiate environment. I suppose the key reason we're here today is to elaborate on that opportunity and to build more connections for collaborations with everyone in the room and everyone you're connected to as well. I think that at this moment in time, we have quite a unique leadership response to make, and turning our ambition into action is critical through the work that we do in higher education. I'm going to illustrate the opportunity as I see it in a couple of short slides in terms of impact. We have our national legislation that translates through to the public sector mandate on climate action. And there are very clear targets set out in terms of reducing our emissions, increasing our energy efficiency, and reporting publicly on the progress that we're making. At any given time in the higher education ecosystem, we have more than 400,000 students' attention. And that's a huge number of people in our population. If you take that number of people and you scale it out across all of the HEIs nationally, if you include all of our research partners, you include all of our community partners, you include all of our staff and all of our industry connections, we have an immediate reach of more than 1 million people. That's significant. So we can beat a drum that can change the way we do things. In terms of our absolute emissions target, we have to reduce by 32,000 tons of CO2 annually by 2030. And that's to hit the 2030 targets. We know that the UN, through its recent report last March, has synthesized all of the analysis and understanding of the impacts of climate change globally, and said that actually those countries that are most developed have the most responsibility to take action sooner. So while we have to reduce by 32,000 CO2 tons annually to 2030 targets, we're being asked to advance that even further. So we need responsive and collective action. The third level sector is one of the largest estates across the public sector. We contribute 18% of the total emissions across the public sector. The public sector has been asked to lead by example in all of the climate action plans that are out there, and I believe that is a role we should play. As the third largest estate after the HSE and the OPW, we have quite unique landscapes and campuses, places that lots of different people come as destinations, as you're all here today. And we have a DNA within us that is curious, that is creative, that is innovative, and wants to build, create, and share knowledge. We also, in particular with the TUs now in place, have the complex challenges of multi-campus delivery, and we are regionally positioned to reach throughout the country. In terms of the overall CO2 tons that relate specifically to energy-related emissions across Scope 1 and 2, we have, as of 2022, over 120,000 tons of emissions. And of that, if we are to achieve our 2030 targets, we have to reduce 74,000 tons of absolute reduction. So we have a significant sharp curve to meet here. We have to plan and organize how we're going to do that across our operations through a number of things, using our assets more effectively, being more efficient about how we design and build, and also being creative in terms of generation of energy on site. But that takes planning, that takes organization, and we have to be able to do that together and share that knowledge as we go, because no single institution has all of the answers. And if we are to include now Scope 3, which is the elephant in the room, energy is one of the biggest topics. We know that the largest portion of the third level sector emissions is in Scope 3. And that's all about behavior change. It's all about what we buy, how we procure, what we waste, what we use. And many organizations' charts look like ours. So this is a snapshot in time from our climate action roadmap that shows that the majority of our emissions are Scope 3 related. So we have lots of students, we have lots of staff, we have lots of partners traveling to and from campus. Transport is a big piece as well. But yet transport and travel and connectivity and partnerships is also what we're about. So we have to balance all of this into our thinking. So in terms of the solutions, I think moments like this in time where we can come together and actually develop ourselves as leaders in this space is critical, because we have quite a lot of work to do together. Time is against us. However, I think through the opportunity with the public sector mandate, the higher education institutions increasingly identifying and recognizing the need for resources and leadership in these areas, we can play quite a critical role in leading by example across the public sector. So, leadership. Leadership is not a role, it is about action and responsibility. And so with that, I hope you all have a fabulous session today. We have some incredible speakers lined up, and hopefully we will create connections and new ways of collaborating beyond today's event, having had our lovely session. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for doing that, Jennifer. And now I just want to hand you over to our MC for the rest of the day. So Ken Boyle, many will know Ken. He's been walking the walk in sustainability for a long time. And this is obviously a team effort, but Ken is taking the lead on this project. And he's 28 years old. So you can see that it's taken quite a toll on him. Thank you. He's actually 29 years in TU Dublin today. So well done. Yeah. And as the colleague said, you get more for, or you get less for murder. But there you go. Right? Anyway, I'll hand over to Ken. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, after that revelation, I want to introduce the panel. So we're going to lead off the whole event, the whole summit, with a discussion on climate justice. And we're focusing on that because I think a lot of the time when we talk about climate, we're fixated on numbers, 1.5, parts per million, 400 plus. We're fixated on times, 2030, 2050, the end of the century. Well, these are all worthy targets and so on. The reality is, climate change is impacting on people's lives, and it's impacting in particular on people without power. So we have a panel this afternoon who is going to bring us through a discussion on climate and climate justice. And it's going to be, so if I could invite the panel to take their seats. And the discussion will be led by Jenny Stevens. Jenny Stevens is the newly appointed Professor of Climate Justice at Maynooth University. And she has been a climate justice scholar and activist advocating for higher education leadership on climate and energy for over 3 decades. She has recently moved back to Ireland from the United States, where she was Harvard Radcliffe Climate Justice Fellow and a professor at the Policy School at Northeastern University. And in November of this year, her book, Climate Justice and the University, is coming out. And that's something we will all have to read. Our panel members are Vanessa Conroy, who is the project officer on project Feminist Communities for Climate Justice with the National Women's Council of Ireland. And this is a joint project between the National Women's Council and Community Work Ireland, aiming to put a gendered, feminist and community work lens on climate justice. Vanessa has worked as a lecturer and academic tutor at Maynooth University in the Department of Applied and Social Studies, and has taught on environmental policy, climate justice and intersectional environmentalism. Emer Manning is Aoife Hines is a sustainability and student activist. She's the Vice President for the Border, Midlands and Western region of Students' Union of the USI, and she's the incoming Vice President for Equality and Citizenship. She's been involved in Aoife has been involved in sustainability for a long time, and they studied geography and international development at Maynooth University, and during the time there they became heavily involved in the Students' Union and now work nationally for the Union of Students in Ireland. Emer Manning is the Youth and Climate Justice Development Officer for the National Youth Council of Ireland. Emer manages youth-led projects centred on issues of climate change, climate justice, marine sustainability and meaningful youth inclusion. She also works alongside the Council of Europe, developing recommendations on young people and climate action. And Laura O'Connor is a political engagement and campaigns manager with Concern Worldwide. Laura heads up Concern's campaign team, where she works on climate, hunger and the SDGs. She sits on the Coalition 2030 Steering Committee, and she has a background in campaigns, political communications and policy. And she previously worked with MEPs in the European Parliament. So, Jenny, I'm handing over to you now to do this off.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ken. And thank you. It's great to be here. It's an honor to be facilitating this panel. I think we're going to have a great discussion. Very excited for it. And I want to also applaud the organizers for starting us off with a panel focused on climate justice. I think what we can do in this discussion is elevate our ambitions and broaden the discourse and discussions. As Ken pointed out, we tend to focus on numbers and targets and a kind of technocratic way of thinking about the climate crisis. But what climate justice is about is broadening that and connecting the climate crisis as a symptom, actually, rather than the problem that we need to address. So if you think about the climate crisis as a symptom of our societal structure, our economic systems, and our power structures that continue to concentrate wealth and power among fewer and fewer people, that more and more people are getting left behind, disadvantaged, and more vulnerable. And climate justice is really a paradigm shift. It's really about transformation. It's not, we are now at the point where we can no longer just work on small incremental changes. We have actually been doing that already for decades, and it's insufficient, inadequate, and ineffective. Things are going in the wrong direction globally. If you look at the numbers. So what we really need is more radical transformation. And what we're going to discuss in this panel is how can higher education institutions, which are institutions that are historically quite slow to change, right, and reinforce often the status quo in many ways, how can higher education institutions be restructured and reimagined for the disruptive future ahead, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I'd like to also just kind of follow up on, before I ask each of the speakers to introduce themselves and explain their work on climate justice and how they connect with higher education institutions. But I also wanted to follow up on what Jennifer mentioned about the power and reach and sphere of influence of higher education institutions. I think we sometimes in society at large don't recognize how powerful universities and technical universities and all different kinds of higher education institutions are. And if you look at authoritarian governments, they target universities and invest in universities and try to control universities because higher education is so powerful, right? This is where our foundation is of our societal expectations is kind of legitimized, right? So we actually, I think, have more power, I guess I would say, than we think. And we need to make sure that we maintain that power of higher education and don't let higher education be captured by powerful interests that want to steer us in a certain direction or just resist climate action, which more and more research is showing how so many big corporations have been investing in higher education very strategically to reduce the transformative power of higher education. So with that kind of context, I'd really like to open it up and hear from each of our speakers about, and what I've asked them to do at the beginning, and we will have time for questions and discussion. We want this to be as interactive as possible. At first, we'd like you to each kind of just explain, introduce yourselves and explain how you and your organization are working toward climate justice, and from your perspective, what role do higher education institutions have? So I think we'll start at that side and move up, if that's okay. So Emer, that would be you first.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you all hear me? No? Give me 2 seconds. Now? 1, 2, 3?
Yes.
Oh, no. Perfect, thanks. Before I start, I just want to highlight one thing really quickly. I have a medical condition that involves an awful lot of throat surgeries, and sometimes my throat can catch. If that does happen, just give me 2 seconds and I'll be fine, okay? Just in case. But hello, my name is Emer Manning. I am the Youth and Climate Justice Development Officer with the National Youth Council of Ireland. So NYCI is a representative body of the voluntary youth services, youth work in Ireland. We're a membership organisation, so we have 60 members, and we work collaboratively and collectively to advocate for issues that are important to young people. So we have many different branches in NYCI. We have health, we have STEAM, we have arts, but we also have climate justice. Before I begin and delve into my role, I want to just specify that for NYCI, youth is between the ages of 13 to 30. So while we interact with young people on, whoops, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, while we interact with young people on a I don't think that's working, 1, 2, 3. Oh yeah, it is. On a non-formal basis, just bear in, no, it's turning off. It's okay, I'll just project.
I think I need it for the recording.
Okay. The red light keeps switching off on it, sorry. So while we work with young people on a non-formal basis, just bear in mind that many of the young people we work with are in HEIs, or they're in formal education of some kind, whether it's secondary school, university, colleges, etc. So my climate justice group focuses solely on those who are already marginalised. So we work with young people who are racialised, we work with young people who are part of the traveller or the Roma community, we work with young people who are at risk of being in trouble with the law, or who have families that typically might have substance abuse issues, and what we do is we have a really difficult introduction of climate justice to these groups. And I'm going to say something to you that might seem a little bit controversial at first when I say it, but I hope that you'll understand where I'm coming from after I say it. Climate change as an issue is a privileged issue. This means that if you, in your brain and in your body, have the capacity to worry consistently about climate change as one of the biggest worries in your life, you are privileged to be able to do that, because it means that you don't have something that's a more direct threat to your life right there and then in that moment. And when you're working with your students, you don't know what's going on behind the background for many of them. They feel like they need to be an adult around you, they need to put on a brave face, so they have these issues at home that you might not understand. Then they have work and college and assignments building up, and then I come in and have to tell them about this monster of climate change and how not only is it happening now, but it's just going to get worse in the future. And the other issue is we have very, very few marginalised voices that are actually called to action on climate change, especially in policy-making spaces. So we work with these young people to get them to a place where they feel like they are empowered enough to actually take action. But then another beast comes into play, and you may have heard of it before. It's called eco-anxiety. And you also may or may not have heard of its other name, which is solastalgia. So I'm assuming you all know the term nostalgia, which is this yearning to go back to a place or time in the past that you loved. Solastalgia is a new form of that, where you are yearning for the future that you know that you should have, but you never will because of climate change. How incredibly upsetting is that? So now we have to pile that on top of the young people that we're working with who are already from vulnerable and marginalised backgrounds. So I hope that through the conversations today, we can show you how HEIs can essentially be a catalyst to empower the young people that you are working with to become true global citizens without putting too much pressure on the shoulders. It's basically being a supportive network to be able to empower young people through knowledge and skills, as opposed to feeling like you are dumping more and more information on top of some already very weighty shoulders. So thank you so much, and I'll pass you back.
Great, thank you, Emer. Very important perspective. Next, we'll hear from Vanessa.
Hi everyone, my name is Vanessa Conroy and I'm the project officer on a project called Feminist Communities for Climate Justice. We're a joint project between the National Women's Council of Ireland and Community Work Ireland, aiming to put a feminist lens on climate justice and also a community-led lens on climate justice. So there are two large kind of goals of our project. The first one being trying to fill a big domestic data gap in exposing kind of the gendered impact of the climate crisis for women and girls in Ireland. And we mean women and girls in all of their diversity. So we don't just mean like women, we mean traveller women, we mean disabled women, we mean migrant and asylum seeking women as well. So women in all of their diversity is who we work with. And really what we see currently in Ireland is that we do have domestic data gaps on the impacts, the differential impacts of climate policy and the climate crisis on particularly marginalised communities in Ireland. And so one piece of the project is to really highlight not only the gendered difference, but the difference for those other marginalised communities in Ireland and bring it to the attention of the communities themselves who will be impacted, but also to influence policy and policy making and our decision makers, so that our climate policy and our climate decision making is drawn up with attention to those differential impacts. And really the second goal then of our project is to equip those communities on the ground with the knowledge of the climate crisis, how to communicate it with marginalised communities and vulnerable communities, and more importantly, how to empower those communities to organise and to create their own solutions, but also to be able to demand change from their decision makers as well. And we've been very lucky so far kind of in our interactions with higher education institutes, in that we've had two significant pieces of work of the project done with two different universities here in Ireland. The first being a piece of research that we recently had done, and I anticipated having two hands free, so this is going to be a little trickier than I thought. Thanks so much. This feminist climate justice report that we did with the team at the School of Applied Social Studies at UCC. This is quite a groundbreaking piece of research in that it's a baseline review of Irish climate and climate adjacent policy and its impacts on women and girls in Ireland and also marginalised communities, and then approaches to how we might potentially have a more feminist intersectional approach in our policy making. So that's largely one of the first pieces we did in conjunction with higher education institutes. And the second piece that's ongoing, we're coming to an end with it now, but we're actually doing with Maynooth University's Department of Applied Social Studies, and that's a QQI Level 7 certificate programme in community work called Community Work in a Changing Ireland, Feminist Climate Justice. And the National Women's Council of Ireland and Community Work Ireland have partnered up with Maynooth University in that to deliver basically a training programme for community workers who are already established in the country, already working, and trusted figures within particularly vulnerable communities to basically communicate the climate crisis and be able to talk about it with their communities, and most importantly, linking it to issues that are already happening in their lives. So, for example, the impacts of the housing crisis, the ghost buses that never show up at the end of your road, the mold and the poor insulation in housing and such. And we are working with community workers from a huge geographical spread all over the country, all Ireland, so in Northern Ireland as well. And they are working with the traveller community, they're working directly within direct provision centres, they are working in PPNs, in the trade union movement. They are working on an international basis. We have representatives from Brazil, from Colombia, from Nigeria. And really the goal is to have those community workers, again, not to swoop in as the experts in the white coats, but to empower the people who are already really trusted figures in those communities to come in and deliver the climate knowledge and climate projects to their communities themselves. And we started that in January and we'll be coming to a close mid-July. And really for us, climate justice is a structural issue, and when we talk about the gendered impact of the climate crisis, we like to say natural disasters and climate change themselves aren't sexist. It's the structures, the societal and cultural attitudes that we've built around them. It's not climate change's fault that there is a gender pay and a gender pension gap. It's not climate change's fault that it's seen as less important for some women to learn how to swim or go to school or read and write. It's the issue with the fact that we've got a patriarchal system that sees women as less valuable than men, and how that is compounded then by the climate crisis. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of the conversations that we have today. So thank you.
Great, so we've heard from Emer and Vanessa, and they both have highlighted how climate policy and energy policy are often isolated, and seen as discrete and separate from everything else, whereas vulnerable and marginalized communities are often left out, and voices are not included often in our mainstream discourse on climate. We really have an opportunity in our higher education institutions for partnering in new and different ways to change that. So thank you for those. Next we'll hear from Laura from Concern.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you to our two great speakers before me. Concern is really here because for us the impact of climate change really exacerbates existing inequalities. Concern at its core actually isn't a climate organisation. We work in 26 countries working to end extreme poverty, and the reason we work on climate is because of the devastating impact it's having across all of the people we work to support. So if you look at the devastating drought that's happened in the Horn of Africa for the past couple of years, there's been no rainy seasons for I think 5 or 6 seasons, which means there's been no rain for several years. The damage that has to crops, to people's livelihoods, to their own lives, to their children, it's catastrophic. You also can look at the massive floods that were in Bangladesh or in Pakistan 2 years ago that left 1/3 of the country completely underwater. We work a lot with communities all across Bangladesh, and they're constantly facing cyclones, rising sea levels, hurricanes, you name it. They're really facing climate issues that are really putting their country at risk. So for us, that's one of the key reasons why we're working on climate change. One of our core policies is food inequality, and I think that goes hand in hand with climate justice. Climate change is causing hunger, starvation. In some cases, it's contributing to famines. It is making the lives of people, significantly worse. It's impacting crop prices. It's impacting people's ability to grow crops, to plant crops, and to really plan for the future. So the work that Concern does with our overseas programming is really in partnership with communities. We work on climate adaptation, we work on climate resilience, and what that looks like is climate smart agriculture, it's flood management, it's water purification, it's working on education programs and empowerment programs. We are quite a large organisation, so also our advocacy teams work a lot on climate finance, and I think climate finance and climate justice also go hand in hand. Lots of these countries who we're working to support, they haven't caused climate change. Their emissions are quite low, consider if you compare it to North America and Europe, and they're really the ones at the very forefront of climate change, taking the brunt of something that they had no hand in causing. So that's where they're trying to lobby for more funds around loss and damage. There was a climate conference last week, it was the halfway mark to COP, it was SB60, where they were looking at new baseline minimum funds to help fund climate change, and it's simply not enough. They're talking about 100 billion a year for climate change. The UN has said that by 2030 we'll need 5.8 trillion a year to combat the impacts of climate change. So it's quite significant. We also work a lot with youth climate activists, and we can talk about that a bit more in a bit. And that's really empowering, actually, to see these amazing young people who are standing up for their communities, speaking to an international audience. And Concern's relationship with higher education organisations, we work a lot with academics on research papers. A few different universities are involved in our broader partnerships, and working from food security, food nutrition, to I think we're working with a student at the moment who is looking at the power of youth activists in Malawi. And also through the campaigns program, we have a youth climate ambassador program. It's not specifically targeted at university students, it's open to anyone from the ages of 18 to 30. Our current youth climate ambassador, Dervla, is from UCC, and that role is really to work with people overseas and use that platform to share their stories and experiences. And we also have two campaigns, Project Us, which looks at the SDGs, and we work with Stand. I don't know where Susie from Stand is, she's somewhere in the audience. We work a lot with them on just going into university campuses and speaking with young people about the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have a whole host of other activities. So there is a lot of engagement, especially from the Irish side within higher education.
Great, well, thank you, Laura. Very important to add the international global dimension, and there really is a growing global climate justice movement throughout the world that we are all a part of in different ways, and what happens here in Ireland obviously has a lot of implications and connections. Thank you for that. So next, and our final speaker is Aoife.
Hi, I'm Aoife, and I'm from the Union of Students in Ireland. The Union of Students in Ireland is not strictly a sustainability organisation or a climate justice organisation, but the principles of it are something that are very much embedded in our history. We've been around since 1959, so we are entrenched very much in student life and the higher education system in several ways. First thing is that we are embedded into committees for the Higher Education Authority. We are the people that the government comes to when they want student input into any policies they're writing. We have those connections there. And that's why collaboration matters so much to us, because we are an organisation that we've only got a limited amount of officers and a limited amount of time and a limited amount of funds, as everybody does. So hearing the absolutely fantastic work being done by my fellow panellists is really, really heartening, because those are the sort of things that we can borrow from and support. The second way in which we are embedded is that we run the training for the student union officers around the country, and they're often the first point of contact. They're often the first point of contact for so many student activists. You'll have environmental societies and they want to change things within their own universities, so they go to the students. Now, like I said, we are a member organisation and everything we do is democratically decided by our members. And what we hear from our members is that they want things to change, but often they don't know how that is going to change. Everybody's afraid. Even I've been involved in this for as long as I can remember. And what I've found is that people care, but people don't know what to do. Even myself, I've done however much research and however much engagement, and I don't have the answers. So what we are trying to work on is knowledge sharing in a lot of ways. The big thing that we are working on in USI at the moment is a forum to bring together our environmental societies, green campus groups, and students' unions from around the country into one place. We're trying to embed intersectional climate justice into our trainings, into our events going forward. We would often be seen as people who organise protests and everything like that, but a lot of the time it is just about giving the knowledge and the design for campaigns and the connections to our members further down the line so they can work within their own universities. We have to decentralise what we do, and we are very, very much interested in pursuing climate justice. We have done some fantastic work across the years with Fridays for Future. We would have been out there and seen. We were Sustainable Development Goal ambassadors with the Sustainable Development Department of the government, and now we are going to be champions. So we are encouraging more people to sign up and more organisations. Again, like I'm saying, we're not strictly a sustainability organisation, but what we do is we take the work of others who have the capacity, have the knowledge, have the research, have those resources there, and we pass it down the line so that our members can rise up and take action. And what we're seeing is more and more that's what they want.
So thank you all. And one of the goals of this panel, and the reason we kind of started with the day with this, is to kind of raise ambition about new ways to think about higher education institutions partnering with non-academic organizations and communities. And so the insights that you've all shared have been really, really helpful and inspiring. I'd like to, we have time for maybe one more quick round of questions that I'd like to ask the panelists, and then we'd like to open it up and get some questions from the audience. One thing that has been kind of suggested is that in this time of disruption and change that's inevitable, that we're experiencing, we can no longer assume that the way things were 20, 30 years ago are going to be the way things are 20, 30 years ahead, right? So we're in this time of big change, yet we continue doing a lot of things the same way that we have in the past. So one idea is that higher education institutions are actually under-leveraged resource in society for preparing society for these bigger changes, right? For communities and for people in all different kinds of places around the country and around the world. So one question for all of you, and maybe this could be a quick answer so we have time for some questions from the audience, is what, if you could reimagine or propose or suggest some kind of bigger change for the role of higher education institutions in the work that you do, what would come to mind? What are some new ideas kind of about what could be that isn't yet, sort of? And we can do the reverse, should we?
Reverse.
Yeah, okay.
I think something I would really like to see is we have universities of sanctuary coming to the fore for refugees from war zones. Yet when we're talking about trying to make change in like European countries that would produce an awful lot of the pollution, Western countries, where are university of sanctuary scholarships for students from countries who are bearing the brunt of climate change? We have refugees from those situations. Where are the scholarships for them? Where are the supports for them? If we want to make change within our society, we need representatives. perfect example. I know it's a quick answer, but just I want to give a shout out to an activist I met a few years ago. Her name was Tessie. She was Indian Irish. It was my first time meeting a climate activist, because it was only within my first years of college, who actually came from the countries that were facing the brunt of climate change. And the stories she was sharing were harrowing. It was her family home being swept away, her community being destroyed. And she was able to come to Ireland because she had family over here, and she was able to engage with the Irish education system and put herself out there and begin to spread her message. And that's something I would really, really like to see.
The thing I would like universities to look at is to become not just thought leaders, but action leaders. I saw a figure that there's about 400,000. From a campaign's perspective, that is huge, a huge amount of power and platforming. There, in the last COP, there was an agreement on education and climate that Ireland didn't sign. I don't think it was intentional. I think they were, co-facilitating loss and damage. Imagine 400,000 people asking the government to sign a climate and education agreement that was co-developed at COP. That would be pretty powerful, and I imagine that they wouldn't say no.
I think for us, in particularly doing our certificate program and community outreach, excuse me, there are so many communities out there on the ground who are already doing really inspiring work. And the thing is, the extra help and extra resources, particularly when we're talking about needing to implement policy changes, you need like an evidence base to present to decision makers. And so having universities maybe reach out and partner with these small community initiatives that are already doing the work, but who could use maybe not admin work, but who could use maybe a research partner to really highlight the figures, the facts about the work that they're doing, the impacts that are being had on their communities, and being able to present that as a piece of research and bring that to decision makers. I think that would be a really powerful thing that they could do.
So I'm going to base my answer on 3 statistics for you, and as I call them out, I want you to imagine how HEIs could potentially solve this issue. So in 2023, Eco-UNESCO conducted a survey of over 1,050 young people based in Ireland. 97% of them said they feel concerned about climate change, and 47% felt as though no one was truly listening to their concerns. 32% felt like they did not have enough knowledge on the topic of the climate crisis, and 34% felt as they did not have the right skills to take meaningful action. So between the knowledge and the skills, I think that HEIs could be a huge catalyst here to actually empowering their students to be able to take that democratic leadership role, to be able to advocate for their rights with regards to climate justice, whatever those rights may be.
Great. And I think related to that, and thank you for those remarks, is thinking about, here in Ireland, the higher education system is regionally distributed, especially with the TU model. And in a disruptive future, could we imagine higher education institutions being a resource for communities, more like a public library, right? Or offering, co-production of knowledge, of exploring new ways of doing things and how to manage and navigate the very uncertain future that communities and households across the country and around the world will be facing. So excellent remarks here. I just want to check in with the organizers. I know we started a little bit late. Can we have 5 minutes of a few questions? Okay, great. And should we pass around a mic for questions? What I'd like to do is just take 3 or 4 questions, and then we'll allow the panelists to respond to whichever ones make sense. So if you could raise your hand and briefly introduce yourself and very briefly ask a question, that would be great. Have one here.
I'm Kieran from University. Just want to address this to you, but I love the term privileged issue. I think it's what strikes to solve. And I know that locally we do lots of things in communities to fight climate poverty. But when you think about that, we look at the global scale, how do we, I'm not asking you to answer the question, but that's what the scale of the problem is.
Yeah. Any other questions? I'd like to take a few questions together, and then we'll respond to them rather than doing one at a time. So there's another one in the back here. Unless, Emer, you have a quick response while we're getting the next?
Whatever suits.
We'll wait, okay, yeah. That's grand.
Thanks very much to the panel for this for an excellent session. My question / comment for anyone who views this, I mean, I think we all know here the link between climate change and genocide. I think it goes without saying. So my question, and for you, anyone in the panel wants to answer, is what would you like to see higher education in Ireland do to help students in places like Gaza who have lost all of their higher education institutions going forward? What would you like to see higher education do to help them in Ireland?
Thank you. Any other questions? We have one more here, so let's take quickly two more, and then we'll come back to the panel and you can all do quick responses.
Cecily Roach, Trinity. I think Aoife and Emer specifically mentioned skills. You probably all heard them. If we can take it that advocacy skills are given, are there any other specific skills that we ought to be supporting our students to develop?
Yeah. And one last question here in the middle.
Thanks very much. My name is Connor. I work with some of the partners in the team here at Grangegorman. My first question is for the panel generally, and the second question is for Emer. Might start with that one. How do you think the higher education sector should tackle the issue of privilege you raised at the beginning? And the second question for the panel is that the evidence of the recent elections would show that very few students voted. And we've all talked about change in advocacy, so it's a question which centres on higher education's role, and you've been addressing that before from the gentleman.
Thank you. Okay, great set of questions. So let's just quickly kind of go down the row again, and then we'll conclude. So this is also final remarks, so if there's anything else anyone wants to say.
Perfect. Okay, so Kieran, I'll start with your question. So we do a lot of work on the local to global with all the young people that we work with. We don't really fully believe that young people can appreciate issues on a global scale without being able to tie it back to a local scale. They might be able to appreciate it in terms of they understand the grandiose nature of it, but in terms of being able to actually cope with those feelings of how grandiose it is, we feel like it has to go from a smaller place and then build up. So we work with a method called the PLINGS method, P-L-I-N-G-S. The I doesn't actually stand for anything, it's just to make it easier to say, but the P stands for personal, L for local, N for national, and G for global. So what we do is when we work with young people, we ask them to start from a personal issue on a large, broad topic, and then very slowly we build the experience up into a global issue. And it gives them a framework to be able to understand that issue the entire way up the chain. We then also start to bring it in from different perspectives. So that's where we get to the privilege issue, where we start looking at different people's livelihoods and how those plings might affect different people who are in different parts of the world. In terms of, I missed your question slightly, was it how HEIs can tackle the issue of privilege? So I think that there's a couple of different things here, and I could talk about it forever, I don't have the time, but the one that I'll say at the moment is it's really a solidarity issue at the moment. It's really being able to have HEIs understand what other students are feeling and to be able to put supports in place, particularly with regards to policy and the different policies in place in a HEI to support those people, those young people who might feel as though for their entire lives they have been racialized or marginalized, and that this is a space for them. So it's not creating 100% safe spaces, you'll never be able to do that, but it's about creating safer spaces by listening to their voice, asking what they need, and then responding to that. But if you want to talk more about that, I'm happy to have a discussion afterwards. And just very quickly, I've actually worked in every Irish election since 2008. It's a huge part of my life. And I think one of the main things that we're finding with young people not voting in elections is they're completely disillusioned with the political process. In the past, if they have been brought into political spheres, it's because of tokenism. They get the photo taken with a politician, that's what they want to show that they are quote unquote working with young people, but nothing actually comes out of that. And I think a lot of young people are also confused by the political process. We don't really have a great structure in Ireland of informing young people who stands for what in our political system. So I think a lot of work needs to be done on the education behind that. Thank you.
So there were a few questions that were for the panel. In its entirety, the part about the connection between the climate crisis and genocide and what higher education institutions in this country can do. One of the key things I think that we need to do vocally is to condemn any genocide that is going on, and then really the second of all is to, and referring specifically to the to what's going on in Palestine right now. I know specifically students in Gaza are able to complete their studies with help from universities in the West Bank right now, who have basically allowed them access to complete their studies digitally. And I would wonder if there's a role for HEIs to play in Ireland to act as sanctuaries, whether that is physically or digitally, if that's not possible, to allow those students to complete their studies and also to allow them to use their voices to speak about the experiences that they are having. In regards to what skills do students need, having worked as an academic tutor, the kind of things that like I was teaching students year in, year out was stuff like, referencing, critical reading, critical writing, and like those are all essential for students to be able to complete their assignments in certain departments, but they could go through 3 or 4 years of a degree program and never hear about the climate crisis once. So I think there does need to be kind of built in with a kind of like a critical skills, like, how to higher education 101 module, if you will. We need to talk about the climate crisis in everything that we do, because it is going to touch every single thing that we do. It doesn't matter what department you're in, what level of degree program you're taking. It's going to touch absolutely every facet of our lives. And so I would say that it needs to be a level of climate literacy needs to be given to every single student, because again, those figures at the beginning, 400,000 students at any time. Imagine if they all had good climate literacy that they could talk about with their friends and their family, and particularly for people who might not have access to higher education. And then secondly, I think an important part is really making those connections between the everyday immediate issues for students and the climate crisis. And so it would be connecting it to the housing crisis, transport crisis, health crisis, and so on. So those would be my suggestions.
So we just brief comments at the end here.
Yeah, I used to work at the University of Bradford in the UK in the Students' Union, and the Students' Union had a partnership with a university. I can't remember if it was in Rafah or in Gaza, because it was quite a few years ago when I worked there. And they used to do fundraising. Some of their buildings had been previously damaged, so they would fundraise to support the Students' Union. And they did a couple of training programs between the student leaders in Bradford and the student leaders in, as I said, it was either in Gaza or Rafah. And that was quite powerful for the students as well. It kind of kept them going with fundraising. So that's more of a long-term plan. I know that mightn't be possible now, but long-term planning does grow good seeds. So,
USI has actually been handling advocacy work for some students who have come from Gaza seeking to continue their studies. And what we have found frustrating is the fact that there was a very thought out, completed plan for students coming over from Ukrainian universities to integrate them into the Irish system. And instead of just adopting that and adapting it for the needs of Gazan students, it's just not really been done. There's no actual plan made, and that's something that could definitely change. As for skills for students to have going forward, I think one of the things is learning to check your own privilege, considering it is such a privileged issue. I've had the great benefit that I've been able to grow up in a household where I've been concerned about this since a very young age. And I was able to do that because the social security systems my mother had in place growing up meant my grandparents went from living in a 2-bedroom concrete box with no indoor toilet, no running water, and that's where my mum grew up, 3 of them sleeping in one bed, so poor that they used to share the same PE uniform between 5 cousins in the one day. And because there was a social security there of affordable housing at the time, it allowed a family to climb out of poverty and it allowed me to get to that situation. So what I think is that universities need to be coming out and arguing for better social security structures, because that's the only way your students are going to get through a living crisis like this and be able to actually concentrate on working on a privileged issue like this, and especially for marginalised groups who get left even further behind.
Great. So I think all of our speakers really were highlighting how higher education institutions are critical for deliberative democratic processes. And I think also protests and student protesting are part of that democratic process. And I think I encourage, especially coming from the United States, where protests have been squashed with militarized police forces arresting students and faculty. I think engaging on these issues in a respectful way is critical. So I think we'll end here just acknowledging, and I think maybe this comes back to the question about privilege, is that the climate crisis is really a crisis of wealth accumulation in a sense, because powerful actors have been resisting the changes that are needed and making all of us think that it's a lot harder. We actually know some of the things that need to be done and how we can adapt, but there's structural issues that are really preventing a lot of the change. So I want to thank our panel, and I also just want to let you all know that there is an emerging network throughout Ireland, an all-island network about higher education and how higher education could be changing to address the planetary crisis, and a lot of the discussions in that network are about how we can partner differently and engage differently. And I invite you all to, we're still coming up with a name, so I don't have a name for the network, but it's a thing. And many of you in the audience, the last meeting of it was here at TU Dublin 2 weeks ago. So we will have a name soon, and we'll be looking for collaboration, cooperation, coordination among everyone. So that's an open invitation to everybody. But at this point, I'd like to thank our panelists and thank you all for your questions, and look forward to learning more in the rest of the day in the sessions to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you once again to the panel. I think we've learned a lot there in that discussion, and that discussion is part of that whole thing about how we need to be able to talk about climate change, not just climate science, but all the aspects of climate change. And we have a responsibility to make ourselves and others aware of that.